I'll never forget the night everything changed. It was supposed to be a celebration, my 69th birthday, surrounded by the friends who'd become my family over the years, laughter echoing through the old house I'd poured my soul into. The dining room was warm with candlelight and the scent of homemade apple pie. I remember standing at the kitchen counter, slicing the last piece, when I heard Ashley's voice ring out from the living room. She was standing in the center of the room, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other gesturing grandly as she spoke. "We're so excited for the baby," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "And I just can't wait to turn this place into the perfect nursery. There's so much space once we move in. I already have plans for the guest room and the garden. It's going to be our dream home." The words hit me like a slap. My home. The place where I'd raised Brian, where I'd weathered storms and heartbreak, where every photograph on the wall told a story of love and survival. I stood frozen, the pie knife trembling in my hand, as her words hung in the air. My friends exchanged uneasy glances, their smiles faltering. I felt the room tilt, the warmth draining away, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Brian was beside her, arm around her waist, nodding along as if this was all perfectly natural. He didn't look at me. Not once. I searched his face for a sign, a flicker of guilt or hesitation, but found only a practiced smile. In that moment, I realized the people I loved most saw me not as a mother, not as a person, but as an obstacle, an inconvenience to be moved aside. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I forced myself to smile, to thank everyone for coming, but inside I was unraveling. Every laugh, every toast, every polite conversation felt like a betrayal. I caught snippets of Ashley's plans, how she'd repaint the kitchen, tear out the old rose bushes, knock down the wall to make space for a playroom, my house, my memories, reduced to a blueprint for someone else's future. When the last guest left, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty plates and half-melted candles. My hands shook as I gathered the dishes, the ache in my chest, growing heavier with every step. I thought about all the years I'd spent building this home, the sacrifices I'd made, the love I'd poured into every corner, and now, it seemed, I was nothing more than a footnote in someone else's story. That night, as I lay awake in the darkness, Ashley's words echoed in my mind. I realized with a cold clarity that I was no longer family. I was just in the way, and something inside me broke, quietly but completely. Let me tell you the whole story, but first, hit that subscribe button. Believe me, it will help me a lot. And tell me in the comments what lesson a person should learn before it's too late. So, if you were to walk through my house on a quiet afternoon, you'd see more than just old wallpaper and creaking floorboards. You'd see the story of my life etched into every corner, every faded photograph, every scratch on the kitchen table. This house is more than wood and brick. It's the sum of my sacrifices, the living proof of decades spent loving and giving, often at the expense of myself. I didn't always live here, of course. I was born in a small town in Ohio, the youngest of 4 girls in a family that never had quite enough, but always managed to make do. My parents taught me the value of hard work, of saving every penny, and making a home out of whatever you had. I carried those lessons with me when I married young. Too young, perhaps. But at the time, it felt like the only way to carve out a future of my own. Brian came into my life on a rainy Tuesday in March. He was perfect from the start. Tiny, red-faced, and wailing with a strength that surprised the nurses. I remember holding him for the first time, his little fist wrapped around my finger, and feeling a love so fierce it nearly scared me. I promised him then and there that I would give him the world, no matter what it cost me. But life, as it often does, had other plans. My marriage unraveled slowly, quietly, like a thread pulled from a favorite sweater. My husband, Mark, was a good man in his way, but he was never meant for the long haul. He drifted from job to job, always chasing the next big thing, always leaving me to pick up the pieces. When Brian was 6, Mark left for good, leaving behind a note, an empty closet, and a mountain of unpaid bills. I was 32, a single mother with a young son, a mortgage, and no safety net. Those first years were the hardest. I worked 2 jobs, waitressing at the diner by day, cleaning offices at night. There were weeks when I barely slept, when I lived on coffee and hope, when the only thing that kept me going was the sound of Brian's laughter echoing down the hall. I learned to stretch $1 until it screamed, to patch jeans and bake bread from scratch, to find joy in the smallest victories. Our birthdays were always simple but full of love. I couldn't afford fancy parties or expensive gifts, but I made every cake from scratch, decorating them with whatever I could find. Sprinkles, fruit, sometimes even wildflowers from the yard. Brian never seemed to mind. He'd blow out his candles, eyes shining, and throw his arms around me, whispering, "Best birthday ever, Mom." Those moments made every sacrifice worth it. The house itself was a labor of love. I bought it in desperation, a fixer-upper that most people wouldn't have looked at twice. The roof leaked, the floor sagged, and the backyard was a jungle of weeds and broken dreams. But I saw potential. Every weekend, Brian and I would tackle a new project, painting walls, planting flowers, patching holes. We turned that house into a home, one stubborn, hopeful step at a time. I remember the summer we built the treehouse in the backyard. Brian was 9, all elbows and knees, convinced he could do it himself. We spent weeks sawing, hammering, and arguing over blueprints drawn in crayon. When it was finally done, he invited every kid in the neighborhood to climb up and see the view. I stood at the kitchen window watching him laugh with his friends, and felt a pride so deep it brought tears to my eyes. There were late-night talks, too. The kind that only happen when the world is quiet and the worries of the day have faded. Brian would crawl into my bed, his head warm against my shoulder, and ask me questions about life, about his father, about why things had to be so hard sometimes. I never lied to him, but I tried to soften the edges of the truth. "We're a team," I'd say. "As long as we have each other, we'll be okay." And somehow, we always were. Of course, there were moments of pain, more than I care to remember. There were times when the bills piled up faster than I could pay them, when I had to choose between groceries and the electric bill, when I wondered if I was failing him. I remember one winter when the furnace broke, and I couldn't afford to fix it. We bundled up in every blanket we owned, drank hot cocoa by candlelight, and pretended we were camping in the Arctic. Brian thought it was an adventure. I cried myself to sleep, praying for spring. School was another battleground. Brian was a smart kid, but he struggled to fit in. Other children teased him for his hand-me-down clothes, for the lunches I packed with care, but without the brand-name snacks everyone else seemed to have. I fought for him, at parent-teacher conferences, in the principal's office, in late night, emails to teachers who didn't always understand. I taught him to stand tall, to be kind, to never let anyone make him feel less than he was. As Brian grew older, the challenges changed, but never disappeared. Teenage years brought new worries, peer, pressure, first heartbreaks, the fear that I was losing him to a world I couldn't control. We argued more, laughed less, But the bond between us never truly broke. I watched him stumble and get back up, watched him make mistakes and learn from them. I was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every late-night phone call that started with, "Mom, can you talk?" Through it all, I tried to give him a sense of stability, of home. I kept the traditions alive: Sunday pancakes, movie nights, planting flowers in the spring. I wanted him to know that no matter how hard life got, there was always a place where he was loved, where he belonged. When Brian went off to college, I felt a mix of pride and loss that's hard to describe. The house felt impossibly quiet without him, but I threw myself into work, into keeping everything running, into making sure he had what he needed to succeed. I sent care packages filled with homemade cookies, warm socks, and handwritten notes reminding him to eat, to sleep, to call his mother once in a while. He graduated with honors, found a good job, and eventually met Ashley. I'll admit I was nervous when he brought her home for the first time. She was beautiful, confident, and seemed to sweep into our lives like a summer storm. I tried my best to welcome her, to make her feel at home, but there was always a distance, a sense that I was being evaluated, measured, and found wanting. Still, I tried. I hosted dinners, offered advice when asked, babysat when they needed a night out. I wanted to be the mother-in-law who made things easier, not harder. But as the years passed, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. The invitations dwindled, the phone calls grew shorter, and the house that had once been the center of our world became just another stop on their busy schedule. I filled my days with small joys: gardening, volunteering at the library, baking for the church bake sale. I made new friends, found new routines, but the ache of being left behind never fully disappeared. I kept the house in perfect order, not just for myself, but in the hope that Brian and Ashley would visit more often, that maybe, just maybe, they'd remember what this place meant to us. Looking back, I see now that my greatest strength wasn't in what I accomplished, but in what I endured. I survived heartbreak, loneliness, and the slow erosion of the life I'd built. I gave everything I had, my time, my energy, my love. Without ever expecting anything in return, I was loving, selfless, and quietly strong. I was the kind of mother I hoped Brian would one day be proud of. Now, as I stand in the kitchen and listen to Ashley's plans for my home, I realize that all those years of sacrifice have become invisible to the very people I made them for. But I also realize that my story isn't over. Not yet. I am still the woman who built this house from nothing, who weathered every storm, who loved fiercely and without regret. And I am not ready to let go of everything I've built, not without a fight. It's strange how distance creeps in. Not all at once, but in small, almost invisible ways. I used to think that Brian and I would always be close, that the bond we'd built through years of struggle and laughter would hold, no matter what life threw at us. But as soon as Ashley became a permanent fixture in his life, things began to shift. At first, it was subtle. A missed phone call here, a forgotten birthday there. I told myself it was just the busyness of young adulthood, that he was building a life of his own, and that was what I'd always wanted for him. But the changes kept coming, and they became harder to ignore. Brian stopped dropping by just to say hello. When he did visit, it was usually with Ashley in tow, and the visits felt rushed, transactional. They'd sit in my living room, scrolling through their phones, barely looking up as I offered tea or homemade cookies. "We're on a tight schedule, Mom," Brian would say, glancing at his watch. "Ashley has a yoga class and I've got a call with work." I'd nod and smile, pretending not to notice how eager they were to leave. Ashley, for her part, was always polite, but in a way that felt rehearsed, almost cold. She'd compliment my cooking, but then mention how she preferred almond flour or gluten-free recipes. She'd admire my garden, only to suggest that it would look better with a more modern touch. The first real shock came when I returned from a morning at the library to find the living room rearranged, my old armchair shoved into a corner, family photos replaced with minimalist art prints. "We thought it would open up the space," Ashley explained, her tone breezy. "Don't you love it?" I tried to protest, but Brian just shrugged. "Ashley has a great eye for design, Mom. You should trust her." I stood in the middle of my own home, feeling like a guest at someone else's party. The house I'd poured my heart into was changing, and no one seemed to care what I thought. It wasn't just the furniture. Little by little, Ashley and Brian began to treat me less like a mother and more like a placeholder. They'd talk about when we move in as if it were a foregone conclusion, making plans for renovations and upgrades without ever asking if I was ready or willing to leave. I overheard them one evening, whispering in the kitchen after they thought I'd gone to bed. "She can't live here forever," Ashley said. "It's not fair to us. We need space for the baby." Brian's reply was muffled, but I caught enough to know he agreed. There were other slights, too. They began to leave their things in my house. Boxes of baby clothes, stacks of books, even a set of Ashley's dishes. "Just until we need them," she'd say. But the piles grew week by week, crowding out my own belongings. When I mentioned it, Ashley laughed. "You have so much stuff, Linda. We're just helping you declutter." They started making decisions. For me, too. Brian switched my cable provider without asking, insisting it would save me money. Ashley signed me up for a meal delivery service, claiming it would make my life easier. I felt my autonomy slipping away, piece by piece, replaced by their vision of what my life and my home should be. The final straw came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I'd spent the morning baking bread, the kitchen warm and fragrant when Ashley arrived with a realtor in tow. "Just getting a sense of the market," she said, waving away my confusion. "It's good to know what your options are, Linda. You could get a great price for this place." The realtor wandered through, my home making notes on a clipboard while Ashley followed, pointing out potential upgrades and easy fixes. I stood by the window clutching a tea towel, feeling invisible in my own life. That night I sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were done, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. I thought about all the years I'd spent building this home, all the sacrifices I'd made to give Brian a sense of security and belonging. Now it seemed I was nothing more than an obstacle to be managed, a stepping stone on their path to something better. I tried to talk to Brian about how I was feeling, hoping to bridge the growing gap between us. "I just feel like I'm being pushed out," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "This house means a lot to me, Brian. It's not just a place. It's our history." He looked at me with a mix of impatience and pity. "Mom, you're overreacting. Ashley and I are just trying to help. You should be happy we want to be close to you." But I wasn't happy. I was heartbroken. The son I'd raised to be thoughtful and kind was now dismissive and distant, unable, or unwilling, to see the pain he was causing. Ashley, for all her charm, saw me as a hurdle, not a person. I began to realize that my love, my sacrifices, had become invisible to the very people I'd made them for. Small betrayals piled up, missed birthdays, forgotten anniversaries, promises made and broken. Brian and Ashley stopped asking about my day, stopped inviting me to family gatherings. When I did see them, our conversations revolved around their needs, their plans, their future. I became a spectator in my own life, watching as the people I loved most drifted further and further away. It hurt in ways I can't fully describe. I'd always believed that love, given freely and without expectation, would be enough. But now, I saw the truth. Sometimes love is not enough to keep you from being taken for granted. Sometimes the people you sacrifice everything for see you, not as a mother, but as a means to an end. As I sat alone in the quiet house that night, I felt the weight of my heartbreak settle around me. I realized with a clarity that was as painful as it was liberating, that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. I was more than a stepping stone. I was the foundation, and I was not ready to be swept aside. If I thought the small betrayals were painful, nothing could have prepared me for the humiliation that came next. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that should have been filled with laughter and warmth. I had invited my closest friends and a few neighbors over for a potluck, a tradition I'd kept alive for years, even as Brian and Ashley's visits grew less frequent. The house was alive with the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, and the comforting aromas of home-cooked food. For a few precious hours, I almost felt like myself again. Ashley arrived late, sweeping in with her usual flair, her cheeks flushed and her hair perfectly styled. Brian trailed behind, carrying a store-bought pie, and looking distracted. I greeted them at the door, trying to ignore the way Ashley's eyes immediately scanned the living room, as if she were taking inventory. She offered me a quick, perfunctory hug before launching into a monologue about her pregnancy, her new job, and the exciting changes coming to their lives. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed Ashley whispering to a group of my friends in the corner. I caught snippets of her conversation, words like nursery, remodel, and move-in date. My heart began to race, a sense of unease prickling at the back of my neck. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, that she was just making conversation. But then, as everyone gathered in the dining room to share dessert, Ashley stood up and tapped her glass with a spoon, commanding the room's attention. "I just want to thank Linda for hosting us today," she began, her voice sugary sweet. "It means so much to Brian and me to be welcomed into this beautiful home. Our future home, actually. We're so excited to start making memories here with our little one. I've already started planning the nursery, and I can't wait to show you all the changes we'll be making." The room fell silent. I felt every eye turn to me, searching my face for a reaction. My cheeks burned with embarrassment, my hands trembling as I set down my fork. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Brian stood beside Ashley, his arm around her shoulders, nodding as if this was all perfectly normal. I forced a smile, my mind spinning. My friends looked away, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few offered sympathetic glances, but no one spoke. The moment passed, conversation resumed, but the damage was done. I felt exposed, betrayed, and utterly powerless. After everyone left, I confronted Brian and Ashley in the kitchen. "What was that about?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You made it sound like you're moving in. Like this house is already yours." Ashley rolled her eyes, her tone dismissive. "Oh, Linda, don't be so dramatic. We just wanted to share our excitement with everyone. It's not a big deal." Brian avoided my gaze, fiddling with his phone. "We just thought it would be nice to have family close by, Mom. You're always saying how much you want to see more of us." I stared at them, my anger and hurt boiling over. "This is my home. You don't get to make decisions about it without me." Ashley shrugged, unfazed. We're family, Linda. It's only natural that we'd want to be involved. Besides, you're not getting any younger. Wouldn't it be easier to have us here to help? I wanted to scream, to throw them out, but I bit my tongue. I realized, in that moment, that arguing would get me nowhere. They had already decided what they wanted, and nothing I said would change their minds. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the scene over and over. Ashley's smug smile, Brian's silence, the pitying looks from my friends. I felt like a stranger in my own life, my autonomy slipping through my fingers like sand. I wandered the house in the dark, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs, trying to remind myself that this was still my home, that I still had a say. But the next blow came quickly. A few days later, I was sorting through the mail when I found an envelope addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a letter from a real estate agent, thanking me for considering their services and confirming an upcoming appointment to discuss the sale of my property. My hands shook as I read the words, my mind racing. I hadn't contacted anyone about selling the house. Why would I? I called the agency, my voice trembling. "I think there's been a mistake," I said. "I never requested a meeting." The agent hesitated. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson. We were contacted by your daughter-in-law, Ashley. She said she was acting on your behalf." My heart sank. I thanked her and hung up, my mind spinning. Why would Ashley do this without telling me? What else was she planning behind my back? Determined to get answers, I started searching the house for anything out of place. That's when I found a folder tucked away in the desk drawer of the guest room, the room Ashley always insisted on using when she stayed over. Inside were printouts of floor plans, renovation estimates, and emails between Ashley and various contractors. There was even a draft of a listing for my house on Zillow, complete with photos she must have taken during her last visit. But the worst was yet to come. At the bottom of the folder was a document labeled Power of Attorney. My name was there, along with Ashley's, and a space for my signature. The date was blank, but everything else was filled out. I realized with a sickening jolt that Ashley and Brian weren't just hoping I'd move out. They were actively plotting to take my home, with or without my consent. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the folder clutched in my hands. My mind raced with questions. Had Brian known about this? Had he helped her? Or was he just going along with whatever Ashley wanted, too afraid or too indifferent to stand up for me? I thought back to all the little things, the redecorating, the decluttering, the realtor's visit. It all made sense now. They weren't waiting for me to make a decision. They were making it for me. The realization hit me like a wave. I was no longer a mother, no longer the center of their world. I was an obstacle, a problem to be solved. My love, my sacrifices, my years of hard work. They meant nothing in the face of their ambition. For days I wandered the house in a daze, unable to eat or sleep. I replayed every conversation, every interaction, searching for signs I'd missed. I felt foolish, naive, betrayed by the very people I'd given everything for. I tried to talk to Brian, to ask him why, but he brushed me off. "You're overreacting, Mom," he said, his tone impatient. "Ashley's just trying to help. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word echoed in my mind, sharp and mocking. I was supposed to be grateful that my life was being dismantled, that my home was being stolen out from under me. I was supposed to smile and say thank you as they erased every trace of the life I'd built. But something inside me snapped. I realized that if I didn't fight for myself, no one else would. I was tired of being taken for granted, tired of being pushed aside. I was still Linda Thompson. I was still the woman who had built this home from nothing, who had survived heartbreak and hardship, who had loved fiercely and without regret, and I was not going to let them take that away from me. I began to gather my own evidence, documenting everything. Emails, letters, photographs, conversations. I consulted a lawyer, explaining the situation in detail. He listened patiently, his eyes kind but serious. "You have rights, Linda," he assured me. "Don't let anyone tell you. Otherwise," I felt a flicker of hope, a spark of the old determination that had carried me through so many storms. I started to make plans, quietly and carefully. I reached out to trusted friends, asked for advice, explored my options. I realized that I didn't have to accept what was happening. I could take control of my own story. As I sat at the kitchen table one evening, surrounded by paperwork and memories, I made a promise to myself. I would not be humiliated. I would not be erased. I would fight for my home, for my dignity, for the life I had built. And as the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the floor, I knew that this was just the beginning. The plot had unfolded, but the story was far from over. And this time, I was writing the ending. When I look back on that period, I realize it was the loneliest and most turbulent time of my life. The betrayal from Brian and Ashley didn't just wound me. It shook the very foundation of who I believed I was. For days I drifted through my home like a ghost, haunted by memories of laughter and love, now replaced by the cold reality of manipulation and greed. But somewhere in the fog of heartbreak, a spark of resolve began to flicker. I'd spent my whole life putting others first, smoothing over problems, and hoping that love would be enough. Now, for the first time in decades, I understood that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. I started by documenting everything. I bought a small notebook and kept it tucked in my purse, jotting down every conversation, every offhand comment, every suggestion Ashley or Brian made about the house. I saved emails and texts, took photos of the realtor's business card left on my kitchen counter, and even recorded the dates and times of their visits. It felt strange at first, like I was betraying them. But I reminded myself that they had crossed that line long before I did. Securing my finances was the next step. I made an appointment at my local bank, sitting down with a manager I'd known for years. I explained as calmly as I could that I wanted to review all my accounts, change passwords, and set up alerts for any unusual activity. The manager looked at me with concern but didn't pry. She helped me add extra security measures and made sure that no one but me could access my funds. Walking out of the bank, I felt a small measure of control return to my life. The hardest part was consulting a lawyer. I'd never needed one before, not for anything serious. But I found a local attorney, Ms. Parker, who specialized in elder law. Sitting in her office, I poured out my story. Every detail, every humiliation, every fear. She listened without judgment, her eyes kind but sharp, and assured me that I had rights and options. "You're not alone, Linda," she said, her voice steady. "You have more power than you think." Ms. Parker helped me review my will, update my power of attorney, and draft a letter revoking any previous permissions Ashley or Brian might have tried to sneak past me. We discussed the possibility of selling the house, and she explained my rights in clear, simple terms. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. But the emotional turmoil didn't vanish overnight. I was still afraid of confrontation, of losing my family, of making a mistake I couldn't undo. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. I grieved not just for my home, but for the relationship I'd lost with Brian, for the trust that had been shattered. Anger simmered beneath the surface. Anger at Ashley for her entitlement, at Brian for his weakness, and if I'm honest, at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. Yet with every step I took, my resolve grew. I realized I didn't have to be a victim. I could reclaim my story, my dignity, and my future. That's when I made the decision to sell the house. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I knew that as long as I stayed, I would always be at the mercy of their schemes. I wanted a fresh start. A place where I could live on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. But I couldn't risk Brian or Ashley finding out. If they knew, they'd try to stop me, manipulate me, or even challenge me legally. So I reached out to an old friend, Carol, who had worked in real estate for years. Carol and I met for coffee at a quiet cafe, and I told her everything. She listened, her eyes wide with disbelief and sympathy, and promised to help me keep things discreet. Together we developed a plan. Carol would quietly list the house as a private sale, reaching out only to serious buyers she trusted. She'd handle all the paperwork, arrange viewings when Brian and Ashley were busy, and keep my name out of any public listings. It was risky, but I trusted Carol, and more importantly, I trusted myself. The days that followed were a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I went about my daily routines as if nothing had changed, smiling politely when Ashley stopped by to check on me, or when Brian called with another suggestion about future renovations. Inside, though, I was different. I felt a quiet strength building, a sense of purpose I hadn't known in years. Every evening I'd sit at the kitchen table reviewing documents with Carol, making lists of what to pack and dreaming about what my new life might look like. I started sorting through my belongings, deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to leave behind. Each item was a memory, a piece of the life I'd built, and letting go was bittersweet. But with every box I packed, I felt lighter, freer, even began to imagine what my new home would be like. Maybe a small cottage with a garden or an apartment near the park where I could walk in the mornings. I pictured myself hosting friends, baking bread, tending flowers, living not for anyone else, but for myself. All the while I kept my plans secret. I smiled when Ashley talked about her nursery, nodded when Brian mentioned our future home, and played the part of the grateful, aging mother. But inside I was preparing for the day when I would reclaim my independence. The fear never fully left me. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the weight of loneliness and betrayal threatened to pull me under. But then I'd remember the strength that had carried me through every hardship, the love that had built this home, and the determination that had raised a son on my own. This was my awakening. I was no longer willing to be a pawn in someone else's game. I was Linda Thompson, and I was ready to write my own ending. If you had seen me during those weeks, you might have thought nothing was amiss. I played my role to perfection. The grateful, aging mother, eager for her son and daughter-in-law's attention, smiling at every suggestion, nodding at every plan. But beneath that smile a storm was brewing, a storm of hurt, anger, and a determination that grew stronger with every passing day. Ashley, emboldened by what she thought was my submission, became bolder in her takeover. She arrived at my house unannounced, sometimes with swatches of paint or rolls of wallpaper tucked under her arm, sometimes with friends in tow. "Just a few ideas for the nursery," she'd chirp, laying out samples on my dining table. "We want something gender-neutral, you know, and I think this wall would be perfect for a mural." I'd nod, feigning interest, even as my heart twisted in my chest. Sometimes I'd catch Brian watching me, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he always looked away, choosing the path of least resistance. They were so wrapped up in their vision of the future that they never noticed the subtle changes in me. The way I started locking my bedroom door at night, the way I moved cherished family heirlooms to a neighbor's house for safekeeping, the way I kept my phone close, documenting every conversation. Ashley's redecorating wasn't limited to the nursery. She replaced my curtains with sleek modern blinds, boxed up my collection of porcelain teacups, and even suggested getting rid of the old piano in the living room. "It's taking up too much space," she said, her tone dismissive. "We could put a playpen here instead." I smiled and murmured something agreeable, all the while making a mental note to move the piano to storage before she could sell it out from under me. The manipulation extended beyond the walls of my home. Ashley began posting on social media about their upcoming move, sharing photos of the house with captions like, "Can't wait to make this place our own," and "So grateful for family and new beginnings." Friends and acquaintances started calling, congratulating me on my decision to downsize and praising Ashley for her generosity in taking care of me. I felt the walls closing in, the narrative slipping further and further from my control. Family gossip spread like wildfire. My sister called from Florida, her voice tight with concern. "Linda, are you really selling the house? Is everything okay?" I assured her that I was fine, that I was just considering my options. But the truth was, I felt more isolated than ever. It seemed as if everyone had already decided what was best for me, and my own wishes were irrelevant. Still, I played along. I let Ashley believe she was winning, let Brian think I was grateful for their help. I even thanked them for their support, my voice steady even as my hands shook. It was exhausting, this double life, pretending to be docile and agreeable while secretly orchestrating my escape. But I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. There were moments when Ashley's fake affection was almost unbearable. She'd hug me in front of friends, snapping selfies and posting them online with hashtags like #bestmill and family first. In private, though, her tone was clipped, her patience thin. "You really should start packing, Linda," she'd say, her eyes cold. "It'll make the move so much easier for all of us." I'd smile and promise to get started, all the while quietly moving my most precious belongings out of the house, one box at a time. I changed the locks on my bedroom in the attic, telling Ashley it was for peace of mind. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue, too busy planning her next round of renovations. I started keeping a small suitcase packed with essentials, important documents, jewelry, a few changes of clothes, hidden in the back of my closet. Each night I'd check to make sure it was still there, a tangible reminder that I still had control over my own fate. Packing my personal items was a bittersweet process. Every photograph, every piece of china, every worn quilt told a story Ashley would never understand or appreciate. I wrapped each item carefully, labeling, boxes in code so only I would know what was inside. I moved them to Carol's garage, grateful for her discretion and support. "You're doing the right thing, Linda," Carol assured me. "You deserve to be happy." Despite my resolve, there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. I'd sit alone in my bedroom, the house eerily quiet, and wonder if I was making a mistake. Was I being selfish? Was I overreacting? Would Brian ever forgive me? The fear was real, but so was the anger. The anger at being treated like a burden, at having my life hijacked by people who claimed to love me. One afternoon, as I was packing away the last of my mother's china, Ashley burst into the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement. "I just spoke to the contractor," she announced. "He can start work on the nursery next month. Isn't that wonderful?" I forced a smile, nodding as she rattled off plans for new flooring, fresh paint, and built-in shelves. Inside, though, I was counting down the days until I could leave this all behind. Brian, for his part, seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. He'd linger in the doorway, watching as Ashley took measurements and made phone calls, but he never intervened. When I tried to talk to him, really talk to him, he'd change the subject or make excuses to leave. I wanted to shake him, to make him see what was happening, but I knew it was pointless. He was caught in Ashley's web, and nothing I said would change that. The public shaming continued. Ashley told anyone who would listen that I was ready for a change, that I was excited to be closer to family, that I was so grateful for their support. She painted herself as the devoted daughter-in-law, the selfless caretaker, while I played the role of the aging matriarch, quietly stepping aside. It was a performance, and everyone seemed to buy it. Everyone except me. But through it all, I held on to my secret. I kept my head down, my smile fixed, my plans hidden. I let Ashley redecorate, let her friends tour the house, let her post photos of her future home. I endured the manipulation, the fake affection, the gossip and the pity. I let them believe they were in control, all the while quietly reclaiming my power. There was a certain satisfaction in the deception. Each time I locked my bedroom door, each time I moved a box to Carol's garage, each time I smiled through Ashley's latest scheme, I felt a little stronger. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of my own escape. As the weeks passed, the house became less and less mine. Ashley's touches were everywhere. New curtains, new rugs, even new light fixtures. But I didn't care. I knew that. Soon, none of it would matter. Soon, I would be free. The day before the sale was finalized, Ashley hosted a family planning meeting at the house. She invited her parents, her siblings, even a few friends from work. They crowded into the living room, laughing and chatting, making plans for the nursery, the guest room, the backyard. I sat quietly in the corner, sipping tea and listening as they discussed my home as if I were already gone. At one point, Ashley's mother turned to me and said, "You must be so proud, Linda. It's wonderful to see your family growing." I smiled, nodding politely, but inside I felt nothing but relief. Relief that this charade was almost over, that soon I would be free from their expectations and demands. That night, as I walked through the empty rooms, I felt a strange mix of sadness and anticipation. I touched the walls, the windows, the old piano, saying goodbye to the life I'd built, the memories I'd cherished. I knew I was doing the right thing, but that didn't make it any easier. Still, I pressed on. I finished packing, double-checked the locks, and made one final trip to Carol's garage. As I drove home, the sun setting behind me, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I was ready to leave behind the pain, the manipulation, the betrayal, ready to start a new chapter, on my own terms. The deception game was almost over. Soon it would be my turn to reveal the truth. The day I sold my house was nothing like I'd imagined all those years ago when I first bought it. There was no celebration, no family gathering, no bittersweet farewell surrounded by loved ones. Instead, there was a quiet, determined resolve, a sense that I was finally reclaiming control of my own story. It all happened faster than even I expected. Carol worked her magic, finding a buyer who fell in love with the house's old charm and promised to care for every rose bush and creaky floorboard. We moved quickly, keeping everything off the public radar. The paperwork was signed, the deposit landed in my account, and the closing date was set. I packed the last of my belongings, leaving only the furniture Ashley had insisted on buying for the new nursery. I took one final walk through the empty rooms, running my fingers along the walls, whispering a quiet goodbye to the life I'd built. On the morning of the move, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent, the air thick with anticipation. I loaded my car with boxes and a suitcase, then locked the front door for the last time. The new owner would arrive later that day, and Carol would hand over the keys. I slipped a short note under the kitchen clock for Brian and Ashley. Just a few lines. "The house is sold. I've moved out. Please contact Carol for any questions. Linda." I drove away with the windows down, letting the cool morning breeze fill my lungs. There was sadness. Yes, a deep ache for the memories I was leaving behind, but there was also relief and a glimmer of hope for whatever came next. Later that afternoon, as Carol told me, Ashley and Brian pulled up to the house, expecting to finalize their move-in. Ashley had posted on social media that morning, boasting about moving day and sharing photos of paint swatches and baby clothes. The comments were full of congratulations and heart emojis. She was ready for her victory lap. But when they opened the door, the house was empty. No sign of me, no boxes, no welcome. Just bare walls and a faint echo of the life they'd tried to claim as their own. Carol was waiting for them, the new owner's paperwork in hand. "I'm sorry," she told them, her voice calm but firm. "Linda sold the house. You'll need to remove any personal items by the end of the week." The shock on Ashley's face, Carol later recounted, was something to behold. She sputtered, demanded to see me, insisted there must be some mistake. Brian stood silent, pale and stunned, as the reality settled in. The house was gone. Their plans were in ruins. The future they'd built on my back had vanished in a single, decisive act. Word spread quickly, first among family, then through the grapevine of friends and neighbors. The story took on a life of its own. Linda Thompson, the quiet widow, had outsmarted her scheming daughter-in-law and vanished, leaving nothing but empty rooms and a signed deed. Some people called to congratulate me, others to gossip, a few to ask if I was all right. I told them all the same thing. I was more than all right. For the first time in years, I felt free. Ashley, unable to contain her outrage, took to social media. She posted angry messages, accusing me of betrayal, painting herself as the victim. But the comments were not what she expected. People remembered the way she'd talked about her new house, the way she'd dismissed my feelings and taken over my home. Sympathy was in short supply. Even her closest friends offered only awkward silence or gentle reminders that maybe things could have been handled differently. Brian tried to call me once, twice, 3 times. I let the calls go to voicemail. I needed time to heal, to find my footing in this new chapter of my life. I listened to his messages, heard the confusion and hurt in his voice, but also the dawning realization that he'd lost something precious. Not just a house, but a relationship, a history, a mother who had always put him first. The fallout was both public and personal. Ashley's family, who had once praised her ambition, now kept their distance. Brian, left to pick up the pieces, began to understand the cost of his silence. My friends rallied around me, offering support and encouragement, reminding me that I was not alone. As for me, I found solace in my new home, a small cottage on the edge of town, with a garden just big enough for roses and tomatoes. It wasn't as grand as the house I'd left behind, but it was mine. Every morning I woke to birdsong and sunlight streaming through the windows. I planted new flowers, baked bread for my neighbors, and rediscovered the simple joys I had set aside for so many years. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the world go by, and think about everything that had happened. The pain of betrayal was still there, a dull ache that flared up in quiet moments, but it was tempered by a fierce pride, a pride in having stood up for myself, in having refused to be erased. I didn't know what the future would hold. Maybe Brian would find his way back to me. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe Ashley would learn something from all of this. Maybe she wouldn't. But that was no longer my burden to carry. I had written my own ending. I had reclaimed my dignity, my independence, and my peace. And as the sun set over my new garden, I knew that I had finally come home, to myself. It's strange the way life can change in the blink of an eye. One day you're clinging to the remnants of a past you thought would last forever. The next, you're waking up in a new place, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, breathing air that feels lighter than you ever imagined. My new home is smaller, quieter, but it fits me perfectly. There's a cozy kitchen where I bake, bread for my neighbors, a little garden where I've planted roses and tomatoes, and a porch where I sit in the evenings, sipping tea and listening to the birds. The silence here isn't lonely. It's peaceful. It's the kind of quiet that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. I've made new friends, people who know me simply as Linda, not as someone's mother or someone's burden. We share laughter over potlucks and swap stories about our lives, our hopes, and the gardens we tend. For the first time in years, I feel seen for who I am, not for what I can give. Sometimes I think about the old house, about Brian and Ashley, about the life I left behind. There's a sadness, of course, a mourning for what could have been, for the family I tried so hard to hold together. But there's also relief, and even a sense of pride. I stood up for myself when it mattered most. I refused to be erased, to be used, to be written out of my own story. I know Brian is struggling to understand, and maybe one day he'll see things differently. Maybe he'll realize that love isn't about entitlement or possession, but about respect and kindness. Maybe Ashley will learn that you can't build happiness on someone else's pain. Or maybe they won't. That's no longer mine to fix. What I do know is this. I am not a victim. I am not a footnote in someone else's story. I am Linda Thompson, a woman who built a life from nothing, who loved fiercely, who lost and found herself again. I am proud of the lesson I left behind, even if it wasn't the one my children wanted to learn. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give is the lesson your children refuse to learn. As I watch the sun set over my garden, I feel a peace I haven't known in years. My heart is lighter, my spirit stronger, and my story, finally, belongs to me, if this story fascinated you in any way. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. I know you all are so sweet, and you will definitely subscribe. Also, comment below. You thoughts on this? I would love to learn from you experiences also. Thanks for listening to me. Much appreciated.